you're like me, you spend lots of time poring over maps, looking at weather data, all in an effort to help predict when and where my best times to hunt will be. It'd be nice if there was a reliable source with all this information in one place. Enter the Spartan Forge app. Unlike some other predictive apps on the market, Spartan Forge was created from military combat intelligence experience tailored for hunters, and stands at the nexus of machine learning and white-tailed deer hunting. No more man-made algorithms. This is a predictive model based on real GPS-collared deer data, historical and predictive weather, and the next level of mapping imagery, all at my fingertips. I've been using the iOS app this season, and it has replaced all my other mapping tools. Visit SpartanForge.ai and sign up today, or head to your iOS or Android app store. Use the promo code TRUTH to save some money and download it today. Mobile hunters, if you're interested in upping your mobile game, then head to tetherednation.com and check out their saddle gear. There are a few things you can actually buy that will help you become a better deer hunter or give you the freedom to hunt any tree or any situation. This is the reason why I started saddle hunting in the first place and why I use Tethered's gear. I can honestly say that Tethered's saddle gear has changed how I hunt for the better. Big tree, little tree, from the ground, it doesn't matter. I'm untethered by my gear to hunt the best setup for the situation, instead of hunting for a tree that my gear can use. My current core setup consists of the Phantom saddle, Tethered 1 sticks, and the Predator platform, along with an assortment of their accessories. So if you want to up your mobile game, head over to tetherednation.com.
Welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Spartan Forge. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 338. Today I'm joined by Heath Cisco, and we're talking hunting down a single mature buck and much more. So stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you are doing well. Hope you are feeling fine. Hope you had a killer weekend this past weekend, holiday weekend. Hope you got some good barbecue. Spend a little time with some family. Maybe get a little bit of deer work done. For me, this weekend, every year, the wife and I typically go away. Have kind of an end of year because it's almost the end of the school year for the kiddo. You know, my wife works in education, so it's almost the end of the year for her as well, and a little kind of decompress before we make the final push, through the final end of the school year and into summer. So I didn't get any deer work done this past weekend. Next weekend is, or the next 2 weekends, I should say, is really my final push to get all the rest of my cameras out and kind of be set for summer. But with that, we're going to go ahead and just kind of get to it today. Have one quick thing to kind of pass along to you guys. You've probably heard me mention in the past 2 episodes, but I'll mention it again here. Our buddies over at Exodus are having their 8th year, eighth year anniversary. They've been in business for 8 years. I've been working with them for almost the entire 8 years, and from their inception, they've just basically been kicking ass, making awesome trail cameras and making awesome just products in general, which they've extended, last year into arrows, and there's some other cool stuff that's coming down the pipeline here in the not so distant future. So as of May 19th, so just like two-ish weeks ago or so, they had started their savings kind of offer for their anniversary sale. And so you can save 25% off the entire Exodus website. So with a deal that's this awesome, they'll only be offering that particular savings for the first 300 Exodus render cameras and the first 300 rival cameras. So if you've not jumped in and done that, you're going to want to go over to ExodusOutdoorGear.com and go ahead and pick up their bundles or their individual cameras. You can use the code TFTS at checkout, which will save you 25% on your order, or you can go to the link that's in the description of this podcast. That link will take you there, and that'll apply the savings automatically. So the good news, though, is if you miss out on this particular savings opportunity, you can unlock that 25% off the entire site until June 12th while supplies last. So the cameras, there's a set number of cameras. If you want them, I would go get them immediately. And if you're just kind of looking for arrows and other gear that Exodus has on their site, you'll have till June 12th to go ahead and take advantage of that. So in case you need to become more familiar with Exodus and what they have to offer, let me tell you a few of the favorite things that they have going on that I really kind of dig. So what I have out in the woods right now is I have a bunch of essentially render bundles. So I'll have a render cell camera and an SP18 solar panel. I pair those two things together with every camera set. And actually this year, I actually even extended that to the non-cell cameras and run a solar panel with basically every camera that I have, just so I don't have to check batteries. And I don't know if you guys have checked the price of batteries lately, but it's kind of steep. And then their new rival camera that they have out, I have a couple of those out in the woods, and those things are awesome if you're looking for more of a budget-friendly camera. So the XS Render's their flagship cell camera, and it's powered by 4G LTE technology. Super fast transmission times, making it really one of the fastest cameras in the industry. Plus, it's incredibly user-friendly, dependable. I've had some of these out in the woods for multiple years that are still just kind of pounding salt, man, and working. So they ensure their products work flawlessly, when it matters most. You don't want to be out checking cameras, especially if they're cell cameras. The whole point is to set them and forget them to a degree. And so you can save up to $125 when you're purchasing the XS Render Security Bundle using code TFTS. So head over to xsoutdoorgear.com, promo code TFTS, and make sure you take advantage of a 25% off opportunity. Awesome. With today's show, have an awesome show for you guys today. Have Heath. Oh man, pronunciation. Words are hard for me today. Heath Cisco. If you don't know who Heath is, he is a mature buck slayer, has been doing it for a long time. We talk a little bit about, the people who kind of mentored him along the way. You'll recognize pretty much every name. He has been able to rub elbows and kind of hunt with and work with some of the giants in the hunting space, just guys that get it done consistently. He does a lot of work with the guys over at Lone Wolf Custom Gear right now. He's been friends with Andre for years. Of course, Cody, who we've had Cody on a bunch of different times on the show. And he lives in Ohio, but he's a guy that travels and hunts all over the place. And he's just one of those guys that if he has marked a deer, if you're a deer in the woods and he has you marked for the season, your days are pretty well numbered. And so you won't find very many people who basically understand the woods, understand deer better than Heath Cisco does. We talk a little bit about woodsmanship and just kind of, we talk a lot about things that he's picked up over the years that, you won't read in a magazine, or maybe you do, or maybe you hear it on a podcast. He's a student of the game. He's still, even though he's had as much success as he's had for 30 some odd years, he still listens to podcasts like he's a new hunter and just consuming and learning and wanting to learn from different people if there's something he can pick up to put in his bag of tricks. And that's always kind of the mark, for me at least, of all the guys I've interviewed, of someone who is a consistent killer, is they're just always searching for that next nugget of information. And so we talk a little bit about, how he kind of consumes that, but then also how woodsmanship has, plays a role, or a strong role in how he approaches things, and how, maybe we're getting a little weak on that. And we talk a little bit about one aspect of it is essentially him chasing shadows around a ridge to chase that falling thermal to get in position to kill a deer, which is a really cool story. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and jump into today's show. As always, thank you all for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I got on a fellow who probably doesn't need much introduction to anyone who listens to this podcast, but I have on none other than Mr. Heath Cisco, also known as, to some, as the Iceman. What's going on, man?
Not much, Clint. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Been looking forward to talking with you, and I follow your podcast, been following it for a long time, and also your YouTube videos. I think I really hooked on to it when I seen your cargo trailer build. So I was that's really cool. And then hunting with Chad. Chad's a great dude. So
Yeah.
I was looking forward to it.
Thanks, man. Well, I appreciate it. The feeling is likewise here. I've been looking forward to having you on for a while. You're a name that always kind of comes up like anytime Chad and I talk. So it's one of those things where it's like I almost felt like I knew you without knowing you.
Yeah.
And it's funny you mentioned that trailer, because I've been didn't even really intend to talk about this, but so I built that, whenever all the pandemic stuff was going on, because I was working from home. I still work from home now. And it's been great. I've had it for a couple years now, and it's really let me go out and do some hunting in some areas and, kind of be able to be off grid and maybe be stealthy and avoid having to pay for a hotel room and, campsites, and just kind of whip it in and park and camp anywhere. But
yes,
I might be going back to Kansas this year. We'll see if I get a tag. If I get a tag, I'm going. But next year I'll have enough points. I think I'll have 5 points next year for my Iowa tag. And so I'll be headed back to Iowa. And so I've been kind of looking at actually buying a trailer, because my plan is to go out there at the beginning of October and stay basically until I kill something, to be able to try to really hunt that like Iowa caliber deer, like the reason why everybody goes to Iowa.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
yeah, and so what I really want to do is, I'm like, that's hard to do on like, certainly hard to do on a week, a little bit more feasible, for if you have 2 weeks. And I usually take 2 weeks for that hunt. But I'm like, that's even still hard if you don't live there. You don't get a lot of the inventory. You maybe don't know. I've got a couple buddies there, so I can get some inventory. But I was like, I really want to go out and just hunt and live, like hunt and work, and like almost like I live there. Just kind of
Yes.
have like my trailer set up. And so I've been looking at like overlanding trailers with like a Starlink, Elon Musk company kind of roaming
Yep.
Wi-Fi, thing. That
Yep.
way I can like,
Yes.
that way I can live there, work there, because I work remote, and I can hunt like all the weather fronts when I get the best weather conditions and stuff like that, and don't feel pressed to have to hunt bad weather days, and basically just live and hunt like I live in Iowa for 3 months or whatever.
Sure.
And the trailer that I built, it's great for like, I think the most I've ever spent, it's probably about 18 days straight. That's about the
Uh-huh.
max.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
There's no bathroom, so we're working with nature, when that happens. And I don't know that I can live off of dehydrated meals for like 60 to 90 days,
Well, I'm kind of like you, and I don't know if you know, but I built one
I
during
did
the
see that.
pandemic as well.
Yeah.
So, I've stayed in mine a total of 3 weeks last year. Two weeks together, and then 1 week was separate. But I've got like a composting toilet. I have a
Mhm.
shower set up. I just need to get water, and I can run it by generator or plug it in. Farmhouse I stayed at, I plugged it in. But like you said, the whole reason I built this is because I was tired of trying to book a hotel a
Mhm.
year in advance, because this place that I hunt in, the location I hunt in, to be close to where I'm at, which is very important because you don't want to be a half an hour on the road or an hour on the road.
Yeah.
I mean, it was hard to get a hotel room. So then I'm trying to book a hunt a year in advance, not having any idea what the weather's going to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it was just terrible. So I would go out there and I would pay all this money for a hunt, and then I had to go around when the hotel was open, and
Yeah.
it was just terrible. I did the same thing in Southern Iowa when I hunted there in Zone 6
Yeah. That's
in
where I was at.
2018.
Mhm.
I stayed. It was a half an hour away from where I was hunting,
Hmm.
and it just made it difficult.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I built
No.
a trailer and I pull it to where I want to go now.
That's just it, man. And it's that word game changer is thrown around, I think, a little too loosely, but like actually building that trailer has been a game changer.
Sure.
It's there's even a piece here in PA that I like to that I've been breaking down. This will be the third year going into it, and it's just a big public piece of big woods. And so I like to take trips up there and stay for a couple of days and scout, as opposed to just going up for a day or whatever.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
lets me get a little bit more time in. And but yeah, but it's been great. It's hard. Like I've been looking at all these overlanding trailers, because
Mhm.
I do need a shower of some sort, and a
Yep.
way to cook inside to make real food. That way I'm not eating peak refuel for 90 days.
Yes.
And it's a little hard on the body for that long. It does good for about 2 weeks, and then after that, you're in some trouble.
Yeah.
But but I'm having a hard time letting go of the thing that I built. You know what I mean? Where I'm,
Sure.
where I'm
Sure.
like, I just want to use this because I built it. It does, and what I've found is that even the stuff that I'm looking at buying, like it's pricey, but I'm like, it still just
Uh-huh.
doesn't do everything I want it to do. Like mine,
Gotcha.
as simple as it is, does everything I want it to do.
Yeah,
If that
and
makes
that's kinda
sense.
why I built one. I wanted one that was, small enough to pull with a 1,500 truck.
Hmm.
It's 16 foot long. I've got a bed lift in it. I've got a dinette set in it. I've got my shower. I have an instant hot water heater. It runs off of propane. I've got a 60-gallon, water tank. I've got the Nature's Head composting toilet. I mean, I can stay in it for, doesn't matter how long. I just gotta get water and get electric.
Right.
So, I mean, it works great.
Nice. That's awesome. So man, how's the off season been treating you so far, buddy? Like how's your winter, spring? I guess we're almost into summer. How's all that work coming along?
Sure. Well, I mean, I've had a lot of stuff to do this spring. Some of my, I own a piece of property where I do some of my hunting or whatever, and the fields were actually turning into woods, so I've been clearing all them out.
Mm,
I wanted it as thick as possible for deer, but what I found out is certain areas they need browse areas to where you don't want it to turn into a woods, and it gets
right.
to a certain point to where the trees are getting too big, they start shading everything out. So I've been working on that. I did. a good bit of scouting in the spring. I can't say I do a ton. I
Mhm.
mainly want to go into different areas where I had pictures of bucks the previous fall,
Mhm.
and just look at the terrain, see if I can locate some sign, and just keep that in the back of my head. I don't bank on that scouting to put me in the game and find the kill tree,
Mhm.
in the spring. It just doesn't work for me
Mm.
like that. I mean, I went and found the places that I thought I could kill the deer, and cleaned out trees and even hung stands, and it just never works. It seems like I'm always off. Always got to be around the hill. Something's going on. The food changes. The acorns, the crop rotation. And I'm just never really in the game after that. Now, if I'm hunting rut funnels and stuff like that, it's easy to find and locate for certain properties.
Mhm.
But for setting up on a particular deer, it seems like I'm never in it if I do that. I've got to
Right.
go out and re-scout and look at the new sign and then set up
Right.
accordingly.
And I definitely want to get to that. That's one of the things I wanted to touch on, just like your overall approach, especially because, and we're going to talk a little bit about, what part of the season that you really like and stuff like that. But before we jump into that, like, how did you get started hunting? I mean, I know you live in Ohio. Are you
Yep.
Ohio born and raised and like brought up in a hunting family? Is that kind of how everything evolved?
So I was born and raised in Ohio. I live in Pike County, Ohio. Grew up on a farm that my grandpa had. It was around 300 acres. My dad was like a coon hunter and small game hunter, and then my uncle was a bow hunter. He actually bow hunted. I mean, he was first bow hunter I knew.
Hmm.
And me and dad would go out squirrel hunting when I was like 5 or 6 years old. And I remember one day we come back and my uncle had a buck in the back of the truck. And even though it was a spike, I was just amazed. And so that kind of got me looking at it. And my uncle would take me out, let me sit in the stand with him. And when I got to be 12, 13, I had a bow. Wasn't really enough weight to do much damage on deer or whatever. But I did happen to, I was rabbit hunting and jumped the buck that was wounded in January. I went back and took that bow and pretty much made a mercy killing. And that
Right.
was my first deer when I was 13.
Hmm.
It was a little 10 pointer. And after that, I just kept building off of it. I started hunting serious with a bow probably around 15,
Hmm.
14, yeah, 15 years old. And then I started hanging out with some older guys say older guys, that was 5, 6 years ahead of me.
Mhm.
One guy was probably 10, and this guy had killed several poking young deer. And me and my buddy was fascinated with that. And he kind of started teaching us about wind direction. And he was a big rut hunter.
Mhm.
And so I started learning off of that. And then I was lucky enough in 2000, or it was in when I was 18 years old. Um, I was seeing some good deer. I killed a couple bucks that were around 100 inches. And I told myself I wanted to try for a Pope and Young class buck. Now, why? I just wanted to get one in the record book, I guess.
Mhm.
And that was my buddy's goal as well. And then the year later, I was able to kill one. I killed a 131-inch 8 pointer.
Nice.
And that was in 1989
Hmm.
because I graduated in 88. So
Okay.
killed that one, and it's been all downhill since.
Right, yeah, and then the addiction has started. That was it.
Yes. Yeah, it got crazy. And I started running trail cameras back before I knew anybody that did. I bought me what they call a cam tractor.
I was just
I
gonna
was
ask,
always
like, what kinda camera was that? Was that the old, like, put the string across the game trail type camera?
Well, so that was a trail timer. I had those
Okay.
as well. I had a couple of those as well that you put the string across, or the thread basically, and you tie it to this little clip. When the deer or an animal walked through, it pulled it and stopped the clock so you would know
Mhm.
what time.
Yeah.
And I actually killed a 7 point in late season with that.
Oh,
And
are you
that's what
serious?
tipped me onto this time, which is kind of strange. Um, but then I started getting North American Whitetail magazines in 1982
Mhm.
is when I started getting them. So right when they first come out, and when they finally come out with a trail camera, I can't remember if it was in the mid 90s or what, but it was called a cam tractor. And
Mm.
basically what it was a little box that you put a 35 millimeter camera down in. It was a
Oh, yeah.
regular camera you would buy like at a store, and it had wires coming out of it, and they were all like sealed in there, and it went to a sensor, and that sensor would activate, and it would take a picture. You had the old 35 millimeter film. So here I was running around with this one camera, and my dad made me a security box for it, and the security box weighed probably 10 pounds. I mean, it was huge. I was worried about somebody stealing it because I paid back in that time, I paid like $400 for his camera.
Oh, wow.
That was a lot, that was a ton of money back then.
For
But
sure.
so I would put the thing out and I would dump apples in front of it. That's how I'd get pictures because I'd put it on trails, wouldn't have much luck, but that's how I very first started. And I would go check the camera and it would have like 10 pictures out of a 24 roll. And I would just yank it out and go to the local, drugstore and have them go through and print off my photos. I print off 10 photos, like 2 or 3 of a squirrel, a raccoon, and then I get one done or
Right.
something like that.
Right.
And I got to know the ladies in there and they started feeling sorry for them. So they would let me view the photos and be able to pick which ones I wanted. That way I didn't have to spend so much money on developing pictures that would.
Right.
So that's how it kind of started. And then how I got into filming was um, I was at a show up in Columbus, and it was the ATA show, and I knew nothing about the ATA show. I went up there with a friend who had an archery shop, and I had a couple of them pictures with me. And I went up there, and I end up meeting Mark and Terry Drury,
Hmm.
and I think this was in 2000. And then I showed them the pictures and stuff, and they just thought it was amazing that I had pictures of a buck that I actually killed.
Hmm.
And it was a 162-inch buck, and I had pictures of it in the summer. So then they introduced me to another guy named Don Kiske,
Yep.
and me and him hit it off. And I ended up going out to his house where he lived in Garden Grove, Iowa, back in 2001 or 2002 to shed hunt. And we got to talking and this and that, and he wanted me to join up with him. It was called Whitetail Extremes.
Mhm.
So I started video, and that was with you had to video with an XL1S. Me and a
Right.
buddy did it for like 4 years, and then that's when Lee Lakowski joined with him too, and he actually had a camera school for us and all this good stuff. So I've been videoing ever since.
Oh. How's so what's your video rig consist of now?
Now, well, last year I switched to just a Samsung Ultra S22 regular cell phone.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen a lot of guys go to that. I forget his real name now. I know his real name and I can't think of it. But he works with I know you do a bunch of stuff with the Lone Wolf guys, and Stash Squatch is the
Yeah, Zach Rob.
Yeah. I couldn't
Yeah.
think of his real name, but like, yeah, I was
Yeah.
talking to him at the Harrisburg show.
Yep.
Because I fool around with some filming, and I have a small little handy cam that I like to take out and stuff like that. And I always say I have really good intentions at the beginning of every year, where I'm like, I'm going to take this thing out on every hunt. I'm going to film everything this year, and I get into about the 4th, 5th hunt, and I'm like, I ain't carrying this extra key, and it just goes out the window because I just, I have never found a fluid head,
setup.
a fluid head that I like. Like I love the pocket arm. Like I use that. That's the best arm that I've ever used. Super lightweight, easy to use, sturdy.
Yes.
And I could just never find a fluid head that was small enough. Cause if it's not small, lightweight and mobile, like I don't want anything to do with it. And
I'm like you.
yeah. And I was talking to him at the Harrisburg show, cause they have a booth right next to the Exodus. And I'm usually there with like the Exodus and Tether guys for a day. And I saw his setup, and I saw the arm he had, and I was like, "Oh man!" I was like, "What arm is that?" And we started chatting. He was telling me about it, and I was like, "Are you filming everything with?" And I think he was using the same Samsung phone. And,
Yes, he's the one that got me lined up with it.
yeah. And I was like, "Dude, this is a slick setup, man." I was like,
It is.
I was like, I might just buy that phone just to film because I mean, I use an Apple, or an iPhone. But
I do the same. I do the same. I bought this phone. I bought it. Or whatever they call it, to where you don't have a plan with it or whatever. And it's just a phone that you can't use it as a phone because it doesn't have a plan. It's just my camera. That's what I bought it for, because I have an iPhone and I didn't want to be jacking around with taking my camera off the text. And I couldn't imagine getting text with ears coming in or whatever. But I used that small little setup this past year, and you have to keep it simple. I love filming because I want to show my parents and my family.
Yep.
And that's one of the main things. Plus, I love doing shows or whatever as well on YouTube. But if you keep it simple and small and convenient, I mean, I run it. I run that cell phone with the same rig he has, exact same head and everything.
Yep.
And then I run 2 little Tacticams. I run one above my head then I run one on my bow, and then I got the little remote to turn it on and off. So
Yeah, I might need to switch to that phone because I use just an AX53,
mhm.
cam, which it works fine. It's not overly big, it's not
Yep.
a hindrance necessarily, but yeah, that phone setup is the ticket. And I saw I've seen his footage, and I've seen your
Mhm.
footage. It's like everything looks great. It's like
So
it's surprising that it's actually coming from a phone.
yes, so what you got to watch is if you're filming through brush and stuff like that, it gets a little bit tricky
Right,
because it needs to be, if it's within 30 yards, it's great.
right,
When it gets out to 50 through brush, it's a little bit harder. You got to go to the pro mode and be able to actually focus in when you got your zoom out. So
right.
it's a little tricky, but it's tiny, it's small. If it starts raining, you just put a Ziploc bag over it. It's simple. And then
Nice.
you just take it and you plug it in your computer and download the video clips on there. So
Right. So I got to ask you this, the guys that you kind of got into filming with and stuff like that, are guys that just, they know a ton about deer, and I just have to wonder, you know, as you were, you'd already kind of, had some good things under your belt at that point. But with that being said, you know, when you look back, on your hunting career or your hunting journey to this point, is there anything that you point to, an experience or something that you learned or something, a mentor or something like that that really kind of shaped the hunter that you ultimately, are today?
So, yes, there was several. So back, like when I was telling you, when I was around 18, I talked to a guy and he taught me about about hunting wind direction and being downwind of bucks and all that stuff. And he told me a lot of other stuff, but what I ended up finding out was, he wasn't who I thought he was, and
Mhm,
he was given information on how he done it, but that doesn't mean that it just wasn't working for me.
mhm,
And it was just information that I couldn't work off of. I mean, it was just I would go 3 years before I killed a buck
mhm.
because it was just hunting. You hunt the first week of November. If you don't kill it, then you're not going to kill it.
Right.
So I hunted. It was just mainly I was killing deer, and people were like, "Oh, you kill a big deer every year or whatever." I was killing big deer, but it was not from, let's say, skill. It was just from flat out determination, drive, and just pounding it so hard as much as possible.
Right.
And I wasn't killing them really with a purpose. It was sooner or later, this thing's going to make a bad move, and I luck into it. That was what was happening, and my whole hunting career changed. Um, and I've said this before in a podcast, but people um, so my whole hunting career changed around 2006. I completely changed my style of hunting. And that was when originally Whitetail Addictions came out on TV.
Mhm.
And when I got introduced to Andre, and I didn't know Andre at this point. And then they come out with, at the time, it was called Blood Brothers. It
Yeah.
was Jared Ordati. Then there was Dan Infalt and
Yep.
another guy. And I can't remember his name.
I can't remember
Um,
either. It's just, but I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
But they come out with hunting hill country whitetails, and then the other one was hunting marsh bucks. And Dan Infalt has since then redid them, and they're his now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They got it's all him. But the original ones that I think still sell on the Blood Brother or Next Buck has them now. Jared Ordati,
Mhm.
he has them. It's on Next Buck. But after I watched them videos, I was like, oh my gosh, this makes sense now why this happened. That makes sense now why this happened.
Mhm.
And I started putting everything together. And since then, I've been pretty successful. And then I've reached out to Andre, got to know him, and just hit it off with him and
Yeah.
trying to absorb everything I can from him. And then, I listen to podcasts all the time. I consider myself a pretty successful hunter, but I'm always looking to learn. I
Right.
mean, I can learn off of anybody.
Yeah. That's the one thing of all the guys, just, yeah, I've been pretty blessed with this podcast to where I've made a lot of great friends and I've been able to, talk to, you know, successful, bow hunters from all walks of life. You know what I mean? From,
Yes.
from guys like you, to the Dans, to the Andres, to the Codys, to the Jared Schefflers, you know what I mean? Like whether they're hunting from the ground, using a stick bow, like whatever, But the common thread that I always kind of find is just like, is their general curiosity. Like that is the one thing. And it really kind of struck me. I've only ever met Andre once and had a conversation with him. I was out at the Iowa Deer Classic. excuse me, I was working, I forget who I was out there with. I was out there with, some buddies of mine and working their booth. And, and I was actually doing a podcast with Cody. We were
Yeah.
setting up, and and his dad was there, and and I'd never talked to Andre, so Cody introduced me to him. We're just kind of talking a little bit, and while everyone's kind of like getting ready to, we're getting ready to start the episode, but Cody had some stuff to take care of, and so we were kind of waiting until he was, finished up with whatever he was previously doing. And so I just started kind of talking to Andre, just chopping it up, talking about deer, and I don't even remember exactly what we were talking about, but I was telling him, like, if I'm remembering correctly, it was like a story of an encounter that I had and what this buck did and what why I hunted that spot that I hunted. And I just remember I'm telling him this story, and I was kind of surprised almost to like the degree that he was like listening to me with intent. Like he wasn't just
Uh-huh.
hearing me, like he was focused on the words that I was saying. And as
Sure.
soon as I stopped, he was like, I don't even remember I wish I could remember what the question was, but he asked me a question, and I answered it. And he was like, okay. He's like, that makes sense. He's like, well, what did you think about this? You know what I mean? Do you think he was doing this? And that was when it really struck me, where I was like, this guy could fall off a wagon and kill bigger and better deer more consistently than I will in my lifetime. Yet,
Sure. So
you know what I mean? And yet he is sitting here listening to me tell this story, and like trying to absorb something from it. You know what I mean?
yes.
Like where it's like there's always an opportunity to learn. He wants to know what my experience was. Was there something that he had seen that was similar to that? Maybe it helps him in a season from now or whatever. But that's the one thing that I find with all you guys is just like that curiosity, and that information can come from anywhere.
Well, the more you absorb, the better off, and mainly decision making.
Hmm.
It's all about when you go into setup on a big deer or whatever, you have to make the right decisions. And
Right.
if you make one little wrong decision, it could screw up a hunt. And you absorb everything from everybody. And like Andre, I look up to him so much. I mean, he and I'm sure there's probably somebody else who spent more time, but he has spent more time in a tree stand and scouting than anyone I know. I mean, the man's been doing it since, early 80s, and
Yeah.
he doesn't miss a day.
Yeah.
He does not miss a day. He hunts every day of the season. And Cody is the same way. And that's why Cody has grown to be such a hunter he is. Because I mean, there is no work. It's hunt.
Hmm.
I mean, he missed like Thanksgivings, Christmases. I mean, everything because he could not stand not to be out there in the woods.
Yeah.
And
That,
and I don't do that. I spend as much time as I can, um, but no normal person can.
right.
But you have to absorb. And my experience now when I go out and hunt, it's from my past 35 to 40 years of hunting that is putting me in that spot.
Right.
It's not just what I've seen the last 2 days. You
Right.
know what I mean?
Right. And so that's a great transition into, because you started talking about it a little bit earlier when we were talking about just like the work you've been putting in this off season. You were kind of talking about, that yeah, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you'll sashay through areas where you have an idea or where you think there might be something to look at, and you'll kind of make a mental note of like this, that, or the other. But that's not the thing that puts you on the spot whenever the season rolls around. And so I guess my question is like, how do you approach a season? What does that look like? Because I think a lot of people, and I'm kind of having to learn this firsthand this year, kind of forced into it.
Mhm.
My off season was a little wonky. I had some family stuff that came up that I had to kind of take care of. I couldn't get out as often, and weather
Sure.
did me some disservices and stuff like that, to where,
Yeah.
the days I did have to get out where I could free up, like the weather wasn't cooperating. And so I'm way behind where I usually am in terms of how many miles I've put on, put on the ground, so to speak.
Mhm.
Right. But I'm also trying to look at it as a silver lining that says, when you go out of state and you hunt, you usually don't know what you're walking into. You just go and you make a plan based on what you see when you get there. And you're
Yes.
usually more successful doing that. And so maybe the silver lining is I'm forced into hunting the way that I actually hunt the best this season, which is get a little bit of intel that I can over the summer. And then otherwise I'm going to have to just let it rip when the season hits. So that's a long way of me asking, like, how do you approach a season then if you're not, quote unquote, like, most other guys who put so much effort into that postseason kind of time frame?
Sure. Well, like I said, if I know a farm and I'm going to be hunting that fall, I have several of them that I hunt, or even if I go to Illinois, or like last year went to Iowa as well. But I always I want to know what all the terrain looks like.
Mhm.
And that's usually with the foliage is off,
Right.
in early season, postseason. Just make a quick run through. If I notice some big rubs, just see where the trails are going and this and that or whatever. Just get a feel for the lay of the land and where the deer could potentially be bedding and stuff like that and staging and all that kinds of stuff. But then when I go back in the fall to hunt, if what I've done in the past, I've used that intel to put me in the spot and how I'm going to hunt. But what I found is I get to this point to where the buck was bedded there last year and he's nowhere around.
Mhm.
There's no sign, it's dead or whatever. Well, the reason is because they rotated the crops and they just picked the cornfield, 300 yards away and they're all stacked up over there.
Right.
Or, there's no acorns this year and there was last year and it's just a dead spot.
Right.
So what I'd like to do, if it depends on when you're going to hunt. If you're planning on hunting, let's say the opening weekend. Well, if you're planning on hunting opening weekend, you need to go in there about 2 weeks before and it would be nice if it was raining, if it's not, whatever, and
Mhm.
just go in there and just tear the place apart. Just go in there like a bull in a china shop and just buzz through everything. It's 2 weeks prior to season. These deer run into coon hunters, you know, somebody lost, a lost dog, whatever. You just buzz through there in one day. You don't want to do it 2 days in a row. You do it in one day. You go through there and you find out everything you want to find. If you need to hang a stand, you hang a stand, but you do it all in that one trip.
Mm.
Then you back up. Then when 2 weeks rolls around, you jump in there and hunt that stand. And once you hunt that stand or whatever, and if you see it, and if you don't, if you see something else, well, then you go down and then you start creeping around to these other places to where you start sneaking around to these other places and stuff to where you've seen the other side. And
Mhm.
then you set up on it and hunt it. And you just keep rotating through it like that instead of going in basically blind and not wanting to disturb the woods that you're going into because you did all this postseason scouting. You got to get in there and see if it's actually happening and going down the way it was before.
Right.
And and if you hunt like the first weekend in season, well, the next weekend and the weekend after, a lot of things might have changed. So you have to continually scout by, creeping around, keeping your wind out of the bedding areas. You kind of know where they're bedded from your scouting before, and just kind of sneak in and take little peeks to see what's happening here. Is there a big track headed across the creek up into that bedding or what have you? And and then set up and hunt from there. And you can set up observation stands and where you can see a good ways, or you get in there tight and just hunt the stand. Hunt the sign.
Right. It almost sounds like your preseason scouting, like your off-season scouting, like your winter or spring work is almost to give you a framework to know how to scout it when the season hits.
Yes,
Because
because
what
there's
you're
nothing worse than going into a farm and not knowing what's over the next hill. And I'm
right,
not talking about is there a big rub, is there a big scrape. I'm talking about what is over the next hill.
right,
You can look on Onyx and do whatever, but until you walk it, you may find a little honey hole, and you got to make sure you come back and check that out or what have you. And then you figure out all the bedding places and stuff, and then you can meticulously go in there and scout without busting out stuff.
right. That's what I was just gonna say because the way you're approaching it is like, it's almost like layers of priority. Like priority is like figure out where the deer are going to want to bed, right? Because when I come in here to scout in the fall, I want to make sure I keep my wind out of those areas. Second priority is that if I kind of recognize like the most prominent or dominant trails, or typically, that might be a wrong way to say it, but like how they're using the terrain to move might be a better way to say it, right? That's like second priority. Third priority is if there's any sign that happens to be around any of these, any specific areas in understanding or having a hypothesis as to why. And if I can do those three things when I come in the fall, I have a game plan now to kind of start to really dissect it and be strategic about how I'm going to actually hunt it.
Absolutely, that's it exactly. And I use that 2 weeks in advance to when I'm going to hunt it to go in there and confirm everything I thought.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Are there any particular kind of terrain features that over the years that you have found to be kind of I don't want to say hubs, but just like places when you see it on a map, you're like, oh man, yeah, like this spot here, I'm gonna go look at it, but I probably don't even have to go look at it. Like I know this is gonna be a spot.
yeah, so where you got everything coming together. I mean,
Mhm.
you can look at maps and see where there's 2 or 3 ridges coming together or several ridges dumping down into, let's say, a hub, and there's gonna be a scrape down there. It's a great place to run a camera. Um, I don't really plan on shooting anything down there. It depends on how it sets up and what winds you got. You can get away with it sometimes. You just can't hunt it very often.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times I can look at a map and say, okay, here's where it's going to happen, and go in there, and it's not there. It's somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So each farm's different. I mean, if you're hunting somewhat farm country, or you're hunting like small hills or whatever, or when you get into the big woods, you get into the big hills and stuff like that, it's all different.
Right.
You got to treat it differently. You got to. I mean, like in big woods or whatever. I mean, it gets tricky with the thermals and stuff like that, but the thermals are it. I mean, that's the wind. It isn't the wind direction on what the weatherman says. It's what the thermals are doing in the big hills.
Yeah. There's a spot this past year that I actually couldn't even get in to hunt it, because every time I was there to hunt, it's a place I have to drive about 2 hours to hunt here in PA to have some good deer. And I just couldn't get into this one spot to hunt it, because it's basically on the side of a mountain essentially, and there's an area that this one particular deer like to daylight in, and I had trail camera confirmation that he had been in the area and stuff like that, and it's just every time I was free to try to go hunt it, like it's one of those spots to where you have to get in the morning. Like there's no other way, because you can't come along, like you can't side hill in. It's a couple miles side hill in, and even if you do, you're walking through all the best stuff essentially. And the only way to really get in is you got to rip straight up over the mountain. It's not a far hike, but it's a nasty hike. And if you can't get in the morning, there's no hope, and there's no way you're going to hunt it in the evening. Like you're just blowing everything out that's above you. And so it's a morning and an all day sit. And if you don't get the right conditions to get it, then that deer wins.
Yeah. So, and you got to look at each situation. I had one that came up. It was in Big Hills, a year before last. It was hunting a giant buck, and where he was coming through out on this little flat, it was almost impossible to hunt with this. With I can't remember if it was a southwest wind.
Mm-hmm.
But what I figured out by going in there and scouting is that buck's bedded up around this hill. And that wind is that with the sun shining on the face of that hill, that the thermals are rising right to it. And what I found was about an hour after, or well, right around sunset, he would drop down that hill and come out that flat and drop over and go down to these bottoms. Well, what I found out is I'm like, how can I get in there and hunt him? I know he's doing it. And every time the wind is like this, that's what he's doing. Well, when I was in there scouting one day, trying to stay away from him, trying to stay on around the ridge to where my wind going up the hill wasn't going to get to him, I found was I was in there in the evening and I set up to hunt or whatever. What I found is as the sun started going over the hill and the shadows started up from the bottom of the valley, as soon as that shadow got to me, it was almost like a breeze.
Mm-hmm.
It was sucking down into the valley.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there thinking, what the heck? So what I did was I moved on around that ridge, and I walked up with the shadows
Mm-hmm.
in the evening, and I was only going to get like a 40-minute hunt, but I walked up with those shadows, and that wind kept steady in my face, the thermals, and it was by staying in the shadows. And I could see up above me with the leaves falling in the sun or whatever, it was going up the hill, and it worked so good. It didn't happen on that buck because another guy ended up getting poached. So,
oh man, but that's slick, man. And that's like that, it's like, I always like to say, all the guys that I've talked to and stuff like that give incredibly good kind of advice and stuff like that. What people always have to remember is that you have to kind of use what works for you. You know what I mean? It's like everything is kind of a framework, right? And like, so the example being how to play the wind and how to deal with thermals and stuff like that, right? And so it's like conventional wisdom would say, well, there's no way to get in there because the thermals are always going to have you busted. But like, what you did was just pay attention to the environment.
yes,
You know what I mean?
absolutely.
And then it's yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, every time I've had great encounters or I've killed bucks or whatever, the wind was good for the deer.
Mm-hmm.
It was good for that buck to get up and move the way he did. Either I was just off wind, or the wind had just changed, or I was up high enough to where the thermals were pulling my scent over this way or whatever. So the wind and the terrain was working for him. I was just able to find a little, ting in the armor somewhere to where the wind did a little bit something different because of this train feature, or, just because of the thermals. And it depends, like, I got certain stands or certain places when I go set up, I not only look for what the wind direction is going to be the next day, I got to look and see if it's overcast or if it's sunny and what the temperature change is going to be. There's a drastic temperature change from, at 20 minutes before daylight to an hour after daylight. If that temperature is going to raise 15 degrees, man alive, you can get away with murder because all this from the cool air in the bottom, and when that temperature rises, it's taking all your scent up, and you can get away with murder by doing that.
Yeah. It's interesting what just kind of observing, will get you, and that reminded me of a story. Like you kind of mentioned, that reminded me of a story I was listening to. It might have been Barry Wenzel, I think, was doing a seminar that I'd listened to. And he was talking about using, how big mature deer like to use the wind. And and I think he was kind of referring to this as like a moment when, he understood, thermals and stuff like that because he'd spent so much time out in elk country and stuff like that hunting. And how mature deer actually use the wind. This was like, it kind of like hit him like a sledgehammer as he was watching. And there was a particular deer, I think there was the story, and he just couldn't quite get on it for whatever reason. And what he ended up observing was, I think it was a couple different times, like he always was thinking that that deer is going to want to kind of make its move to like wherever the destination food source was while the thermals were still rising on this hill. And so he would watch, and every time he would watch, it's like there was always younger bucks, does, fawns were always the first kind of like thing to make it out, which, I mean, people listening are probably like, yeah, that makes sense. The older deer seem to like to hang back in the cover until like it gets a little dark or whatever, which I think, which is true. Yeah. But what he ended up seeing was, after watching it a couple times, was that deer was bedded not far away from where these other deer were. These deer were coming down because they were using the thermal rising, the last kind of bit of rising thermals of the evening to get to the food source so they could scent check what was in front of them. What that mature deer did was wait until the thermals started dropping, which would be counterintuitive because now he's going to have a tailwind. But he already knows that the deer in front of them have cleared everything in front of him as clear, and that they would alert him if anything was amiss as he's approaching. So now he's essentially got his tail covered and his front covered. And he said he watched that deer do that a couple of times, and that's when it dawned on him that he actually wasn't moving until he got the thermal drop to be able to scent check behind him.
No, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Back when I first started hunting, I don't think it was in Southern Ohio, it was that bad for deer, wanting walking in a tailwind. Now they're doing it a lot more because, like you said, they let the deer out in front of them, pick up any danger and this and that. And plus they like to be able to see what's in front of them. And then they want to be able to smell what's behind them because they know they're laying down a trail, and that a coyote or who knows what, they don't know if we can trail them or not. I mean, we walk trails all the time, so they probably think we do.
Right.
But they don't want to get caught from behind.
Yeah.
That's for sure. But then, a lot of times too, though, they'll walk in with a headwind. It just depends. They're always going to have a headwind at some point, but they're always going to have a tailwind at some point.
Yeah.
It depends on what kind of feature and stuff they're going around.
Yeah. My buddies and I always joke that if deer only ever used headwinds, they would all end up in California because we get a lot of west wind.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But so are there, you mentioned, weather conditions, and I know you like a front, and so are there any particular weather conditions that it really kind of, things that you look for a good hunt day? Like, is there a particular wind speed that you're looking for? Is there a particular barometer you're looking for? Like, what are those things you're kind of keying in on from a weather standpoint?
So I don't like consistent stagnant weather that's just the same temperature, the same, clear or overcast or whatever for a lengthy period of time, like 5 days or so. I would prefer, if I went out on a week hunt or if I was hunting in my home, that we have different weather changes, which gives you different wind opportunities, different wind conditions and stuff like that. But I like hunting. I used to say, I like hunting a cold front or a front. But basically, I'm not really hunting the front. I'm hunting after the front. I'm hunting the first clear bluebird day sky after that weather system moves through. And my favorite for if I'm on a big buck and I'm, just waiting on him to make that final 100-yard push away from his bed, my favorite is the first south wind after a north front that moves through, where the actual front moves through There's high pressure moving in behind it, which means bluebird day skies and stuff. And that wind changes back to the south. I've killed numerous good bucks, and I've seen numerous good bucks and had opportunities and, missed opportunities on that kind of condition.
Why do you think that is? Do you have a hypothesis?
So I just assume it depends on how long the front is and how severe it is. When a
Mhm,
front comes in, you'll usually see deer out in the field way before you can even tell the front's coming, usually.
mhm,
So it's hard to hunt the front end of the front because it's hard to time it. If that front comes in at noon, they may be at 9 o'clock up doing whatever to feeding up for the front because they don't know how big of a front it's going to be. Maybe they can tell a little bit by the barometric pressure, but they hold up for that front, whether it's a day, whether it's just 4 hours, whatever it is, they hold up for that front. And then after the front and that sun pops out, they're kind of, in my opinion, they get kind of like lazy and stuff during the front. They want to hunker down, conserve energy and all that stuff. And then when that sun pops out, it's just like springtime when kids
mm,
are getting out of school and everybody's wanting to drive their fancy cars around in the sun. They just feel great and they want to move more and they're up feeding. They want to, they've been bedded up. They've been just eating browse. They want to head out and get some of that lush clover,
mhm,
grain, whatever, and they want to move.
right. Yeah, that's interesting. Like, that's, hmm. Yeah, and it's one of those things too where, that you don't always I mean, everyone loves a cold front, right? But you we don't often get just straight kind of north wind cold fronts. Like, at least
Mhm.
I don't feel
Sure.
like we get a lot of them. I feel like, well, I think maybe we got real lucky last year. I wanna say there was 3 in October, like, last
Yep.
year, I think, that we had come
Yes.
through, if I'm not mistaken,
Yes.
and that felt like freaking Christmas. You know what I mean? Because,
Yes.
like, I can also remember where it's like maybe you got 1,
Yep.
you know?
They're few and far between. But what I'm saying is when you see them coming or you hear about them coming, you need to do everything you can to try to get out there and take advantage of that. And so it's like also like a front's moving through. Let's say it starts raining about 6 o'clock in the morning,
Mhm,
and it's one of them days where it gets dark at 7 o'clock in the evening. Starts raining at 6 o'clock in the morning, and that rain lets up around 1 o'clock, and
mhm,
the sun's supposed to pop out by looking at the weather. If you can, they can't predict it very well, but anyways, if that's what you see, I want to be out there in my stand before that rain lets up, because when that rain lets up, it seems like the woods just burst to life,
mm,
and then as quick as it happens, it seems like it peters out.
really?
And I assume that's because they're moving away from my position,
Mhm.
but that's what I found. And I've seen numerous really good bucks, right after a rain. And my trail cameras prove it
Mm. Do
as
you
well. So
when you're talking about, so if you let's play like a hypothetical game here. So you like that first south after, after a north, right? Or after
yes,
after a front. Let's say
yes.
you have an October where you just aren't getting the fronts, like we're just not it's just not going to happen. Will you then kind of look more toward, you know, severe wind switches in place of a front? And if so, how would you hunt that, or how would you manage that?
So if you're not going, let's say you're having an October and 3 weeks doesn't look like there's any weather change at all.
Yeah.
You got decent temperatures. It's not 80 every day.
Right.
If you do have an 80 every day and the temperature drops down to 60 or something, that's going to be big.
Mhm.
And then you have some wind direction changes. That's great as well. And what I look for that time, or when conditions like that, is I try to play off of the moon phases. I try to use the moon guide that Jeff Murray originally come out with and Adam Hayes that has now. I
Right.
try to look for the transit times of the moon to where if I'm going to hunt, I want that moon to be overhead somewhere within 2 to 3 hours of the end of the end of your hunt,
Mhm.
and that way it seems like it gets the deer up a little bit more. That gives you that extra opportunity to where maybe they'll make it 50 yards farther away from their bed if you're hunting in an evening than just making it 50 yards from the bed.
Right.
Maybe they'll make it 100. And in the morning, maybe that's going to keep them, it's showing activity, good activity like an hour after daylight. Well, because the transit time, the moon's directly overhead or directly underfoot. Well, you know, it should keep these deer on their feet a little bit longer instead of that buck being back and bedded in his bed, an hour before you even get in there.
Right.
So I've had some good luck doing that. It's not perfect. I'd rather hunt weather fronts,
Okay.
the tail end of a weather front or a weather change, but that works as well. But
Right.
I don't want to blow an opportunity and go in there and hunt in next to a bed or in a close to a bedding area and blow the thing out because the thing's been in there 2 hours before I even got there.
Right.
Or go in there and set up within 200 yards and the thing's only moving 100 yards and I don't even see it. So then I got to tear down, get out of there. And they come out, cut my track,
Right.
that kind of deal. But you got to push the limit at times and not worry about, you got to go in with the best game plan you got, best weather conditions you have, because, most people work. So you only get X amount of days to hunt.
Yeah.
And just give it your best shot. And, don't have a fear of failure. Just go in there and give it your best shot.
Nothing ventured, nothing gained, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So, we were talking a little bit before we started recording, and I know, anyone who has followed you, knows that you like to target, one deer, and that's kind of the way you like to approach your season. There's, someone who has there's a deer out there walking around that doesn't know it, that's been hexed, essentially, that you're coming for him. But what are you looking for when you're making a game plan for one deer? Like, how do you, identify them? I'm sure you probably have like history with some of them and you kind of know them from multiple years, but when you go to start making a game plan outside of identifying the deer, like how do you start to break down like their pattern, their life, or what is that chink in the armor you're kind of looking for?
Well, usually, like you said, I'm hunting one deer. So is that deer living on the farm that I have access to? I mean, that means everything. If it's not, the chances of me killing it, I better have some good food or it's going to be tough.
Right.
Because I can't rely on November. I mean, I will hunt November and stuff like that, but he could be 5 farms over. So I want to be able to get in there and get on him like at the beginning of season or around the 15th to Halloween and try to take him out then. And if that doesn't work, of course, I'll start running cameras on food sources and stuff like that right after the 1st of December and see if I can relocate him. And then if I can relocate him and figure out the food source he's coming to, I've got a very good chance of taking advantage of it and taking him.
Right. Now, do you consider yourself to be an aggressive hunter, or do you feel like you kind of teeter more on the conservative side, or do you think you kind of split it down the middle?
So I was way conservative for way too many years, up until I started, up until 2006, 2007, when I started listening to Andre, watched them tapes I was telling you about,
Yeah.
and then I started pushing the envelope a little bit and I started having more success, started having more sightings.
Hmm.
And I do both. I go in, I can't say I go in with like a bull in a china shop, but I do it meticulously. But I push the limit. I mean, I do push the limit at times, and then other times I set back. Like this past winter, in January, it was the last week of season in Illinois. I had a week to hunt, and I thought, you know what? I got to take my time. It's late season. There's too many deer. I got to be. It has to be perfect before I jump into these different spots or whatever. I jacked around and seen these deer and moved in on a couple of them, and just blew it. I mean, I didn't push the limit like I should have. Like I knew I should have. I tried to play conservative because I had a whole week, and I should have just scout. I knew what was going on. I should have went in there and looked and see what I wanted, and then jumped in there. I found it after it was too late.
Right. Yeah. It's always hard to make the call, right? Like I think that's one of the things like you only get with experience, kind of knowing when, as the late great, Kenny Rogers said, when to hold them and when to fold them, right? Like
Yes,
that's,
exactly.
it's because,
Exactly.
I used to kind of, like you kind of said, I would jack around the outside of things and wouldn't want to push the limits. And then as soon as I kind of was like, you know what, I'm either gonna kill these deer or I'm gonna blow them out. Like those are my two options, but
Yep.
and that's just once I started doing that, I started finding myself, with better encounters and in the right spots more often. And
Yes.
I was surprised by how infrequently I would actually mess the hunt up. Like I didn't do as much damage as I had previously thought I would by being more aggressive.
Sure.
you know?
I'm sure. I'm sure in certain situations, if you only got 40 acres to play with,
Sure.
maybe you should push the limit. But
Yeah.
if you have a pretty good sized farm and there's numerous bucks staying on that farm, um, you, you know, why not push the limit? Now, if the conditions are right, push it.
Yeah.
If it's bad conditions, if it's like this past November where it's 80 freaking degrees,
Oh, man. Yeah.
the first week of November, I mean, maybe you shouldn't push it because these deer aren't moving.
Yeah.
They're just not moving very far. But as soon as that cold weather hit, you got to push it.
Yeah.
And the rut's completely different though. That's probably not a very good example. But in October, whatever, especially when we had these cold fronts and stuff in October this past year, man, you had to push the limit because they were laying out the sign, they were doing their things. You just had to get in there tight to make it happen.
Yeah. And I know you'd mentioned, you're trying to either get it done that, right off the rip, then maybe that 15th to Halloween, which is actually 15th to roughly the 20th is probably like my favorite time of the season overall. Or you kind of talked about late season a little bit. Unless I want to say the previous 4 years up to this year, I think all 4 of those deer you killed in late season, and then this year you got it done in October. So I was curious whenever I was thinking about, getting ready to talk to you. I was like, I wonder what his favorite part of the season is. And so what is your favorite part of the season?
Definitely my favorite part of the season is late season.
Really?
Yeah, it is late season. Now, am I always successful in late season? No. Like this past year, like I said, I was out in Illinois the last week of their season, and I had a blast. I seen a ton of deer. I had a ton of encounters. It just didn't happen on the buck that I was after. And there again, I was going after one particular buck, and just let some of these other opportunities pass. It just never happened. But the thing, I know why it didn't happen, and I know what I did wrong. And so I learned from it and just use that next year or in any hunt that'll go from there. And basically what happened is I sat back too long.
Mm.
I should have jumped in there. I knew where I needed to be. When I finally pushed the limit, I didn't push it far enough. And I got busted by the front deer, the does coming out. I mean, they cracked me and it was just no chance for him to come out that evening because he cracked me. And I knew where I should have been to where I could have avoided that. But I thought I'll catch him right here on the edge because instead of getting back in there and possibly he's only bedded in there 100 and some yards. Instead, he was bedded in about 250 yards, which I found out after the hunt.
Right.
And I just didn't happen. I knew what I should have done, but I was scared, so I stayed. And then that's why I failed.
Right.
I stayed out towards the edge and ended up getting cracked by the other deer coming out.
So what's the I'm curious to see what your answer is here. So if you're hunting, I'll ask it this way. Is there a difference in the distance that you set up from a potential bedding area or a bed, whatever the case is, in October versus how close you might set up during late season?
Absolutely. Yeah. October, I want to be right on top of it. Late season, normally I don't hunt over the beds in the morning, but I want to hunt back towards the bedding area in the evening, catching them come from it. So you got to think in October, the foliage is on. You got to get in tight. They're going to come to if you time it right and stuff, they're going to come to their bed right after, half an hour, 40 minutes after daylight. You want to get in there tight because the foliage is in there. You don't want to trim a bunch of stuff. So you need to be able to shoot that bed and try to catch the J hook on the way in. And that's all the way from October 1 clear up to the beginning of November. In late season, I don't get back in there to set on that bed in the morning. I set back off away from it to where I can have access coming in and getting out without blowing every deer out because the deer's real finicky and they're jumpy and stuff then. But then in the evening, I can't get that close because they'll see me. So I have to be like right over the ridge, right over the second ridge, and or hunt low, down in a tree, 8-10 foot off the ground. That's maybe high for some people, but that's what I do. And then that way, I just got to stay out of his line of sight and the other deer's line of sight because in the woods, you're walking in there in late season, they can see you from a mile off.
Oh man, yeah, and it just seems like everything's so much louder.
Yes.
Yeah,
and they're herded up, so you get one. I mean, I was seeing 25 to 30 deer a night. So how do you get 10 of them to get by you? The long nosed does. I mean, it's tough.
That's a good point that I don't think a lot of people necessarily talk about. Is that in in that earlier part of the season, you're really only trying to beat one set of eyes, one set of ears, and one nose.
Yes.
When you get into the late season, you now are starting to have to beat, multiple eyes, multiple sets of eyes, multiple sets of ears, and multiple noses just to get to the buck,
Yes.
and
So
that's,
you may have 15 deer have to get by you first
it's almost like
before
elk
you
hunting at
can.
that point.
Yes, absolutely. In certain situations, you'll run into where there's only, let's say, 4 or 5 bucks running together. But most of the time, there's a bunch of slickheads running around and everything else, and they're coming out everywhere. So
Mhm.
it's hard to really tell where they're going to come from. You just need to stay in to get as tight as you can to where the bucks are coming through, and and keep your scent away from where the does are, and set up that way.
So
And
what
just
part?
stay right off wind where the buck comes up through there. He's going to let all them other deer, tell him what the heck's out there in the field.
Oh
And
yeah.
that's why moving back into the field from the field about 100 yards a lot of times is the best way. It just depends on how far off the field they are.
Mhm.
Sometimes they've been closer. So,
Right. What part of October do you like? What part of October, I guess, is your favorite part of October?
so I like, um, around the 15th, there's a lot of big deer I get on camera
Hmm.
and, uh, and have seen. But I kind of like, if we have the right weather, I like the last probably 4 to 5 days of October.
Yeah.
And that's if we have the right weather. If it's 80 degrees,
Yeah.
but if you're getting a couple frosts in the morning and the highs are in the mid 50s to lower 60s, and
Mhm.
it's good.
Right. Yeah. That 15th time frame has been something that I've kind of, I started, building a lot of my hunts around because it almost didn't matter in one particular spot, at least, what the weather was. It was actually the 18th the past several years. I've had, he's avoided my arrow 2 years in a row. But the same spot, two different deer, but it was like, I found these deer in the summer. I shouldn't say summer. I guess it was mid September when most recent deer showed up. And there's a particular spot that I like to hunt, that big primary scrape, and I know from trail camera data the past several years, man, between the 15th and the 20th, the most mature deer in that general area is going to make his first daylight mistake, and
Yes.
it's held true for multiple years. So I started hunting it, and I would typically just wait till like I got the right wind. I really didn't care what the temperature was. I just needed the right wind to get in there. And the past 2 years, it's been the 18th, and I set
Yep.
up, and both years I've had my target deer within, well, I guess 2 years ago he was within 15 yards, and I just couldn't get drawn because I didn't know it was there until it was almost too late, and there was nothing between me and him to cover me to
Gotcha.
get drawn. And then last
Gotcha.
year I watched my target deer come in, embed at 40 yards downwind of that scrape, and just sent check that scrape for like 2 hours bedded, and then just got up and walked out of my life. Never gave me a shot.
There's something magical about the 15th to the 20th right in there
Hmm.
over a scrape.
Yeah.
And if you can scout and find the freshest scrape and the one that's tore up the most, right close to where you think your buck you're targeting or whatever's at, and get in there and hunt them hunts, especially uh, morning and evening, but especially in the evening, and set up on them scrapes.
Yeah.
Gosh, it's good.
Yeah. And
You're going to see deer.
the other part too was I confirmed my hypothesis about that particular scrape area where I saw it. I run a camera there all year round, and there was an early fawn drop last year. And so that doe family will have that, as you likely know, that same estrus state, in
Yep.
perpetuity. And so there's a doe that goes in early in that area every year between like the 15th and the 20th. So whenever I saw that fawn drop, I was able to backdate, and it backdated to that week, which is
Gotcha.
why it pops off. And but almost like hearing about your approach and how you hunt, like I kind of took a page out of the Iceman's book last year without knowing you. I went into this big woods piece that I've been hunting, and I was checking some cameras and just kind of doing some scouting. I want to say it was maybe the 21st or something. I can't remember exactly the right date. It was either the 21st or 22nd. I hunted either on the 21st or the 22nd. I don't remember which one it was. But I was in there the day before because I got there kind of late, and I was like, let me check some cameras real quick and just like run through this terrain, because there was an area where there was a particular deer that I wanted to kill there. It's the same one that I wanted to kill up on that hillside. He was kind of in two different areas that I kind of knew about. And so I went there and was scouting. We went to check the camera, and a scrape line had just opened up. And by the one scrape that had opened up, there was a bunch of gouge marks in the tree. Now, all the trail cameras I've run up there, I've seen a handful of deer make scrapes on camera, but there's only one that I've seen like aggressively make scrapes and typically had a tine broken off at some point during the season. And this deer's kind of aggressive deer because just all of his mannerisms I've watched him run deer off of scrapes and stuff like that. And I was like, man, this feels like it's probably him. I was like that aggressive kind of like, it wasn't a rub. It was just him jamming his brow tines, just like jamming his brow tines into the tree, you know? And I was like, I feel like this is him. I was like, the weather's right tomorrow. The wind's right tomorrow. I'm going to hunt this spot, you know? And so, got up the next morning, got in good and early, and I got to the tree that I wanted to get to. And I'm standing there just being real quiet, just kind of listening. And I was like, all right, I don't hear anything moving. I was like, I'm going to go ahead and start getting up this tree. Set a stick on the tree. I got on top the first stick and I just heard something 30 yards below me just like jump up, and I just heard tines crashing through the brush.
Oh,
And I was
geez.
like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, he might have been 50 yards below me. I don't know exactly
Sure.
how far, but close enough that whenever he jumped up, I could feel it. You know what I mean? And I
Yes.
could just hear tines ripping through the brush, and everything in my body. I mean, I didn't see it, obviously. It was still kind of like that, too dark to see out. But everything in my body told me that was that deer.
Gosh, you just never know, and that's why I try to play, like when there's cooler weather and this and that or whatever, to catch it where they're going to be moving more. Uh, you know,
Yeah.
I, I
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just a chance you take.
But
It
that's
is
that
what it
time frame
is.
you were
But
talking about. That was like the 21st or 22nd, like right around that
Mhm.
same kind of area. Scrape just opened up, like hot spot,
Yes,
But
and you found them by doing in season scouting,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You didn't find that from your spring scouting.
No.
So, and that's why used to I didn't do any in season scouting. I didn't want to blow anything up and push deer out. I
Yeah.
did it all in the spring, and I found that I'm wasting my time because where I set up at for that next fall's hunt is always wrong.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And
unless it's a rut funnel.
right. And what kind of tipped me off was I hung a trail camera not far from there the previous year and just let it run all year round. And when I went back to check, what I realized is there was a doe bedding area that wasn't far behind it, because during very beginning of the first week of November, and I want to say probably again around like the 17th or something like that in November, it was chaos in there. And so I was like, all right, well then I was like, this is close to doe bedding. You know what I mean? I was like, so, I'm going to leave a camera here. I was like, I'll come back in mid-October and check this, because if it's close to doe bedding, there should be scrapes that start opening up like roughly mid-October. And if I can catch the right day, the right weather, this
Yes,
might be the spot. And so
sure.
it was that trail camera data that told me like I should pay attention to that spot, which is,
Yep.
kind of the same as similar to postseason scouting. And then I
Yes.
went in to kind of double check what my assumption was whenever I got there. And sure enough, what I
There
thought
you
was,
go.
so yeah, man, it's just a big chess game, isn't it?
It absolutely is. It's fun. It's what keeps driving us back and into the timber. So
That's it.
um,
That's it.
and we're never gonna figure it all out.
I hope I never do.
There's a lot of yeah, me too. There's a lot of people that are a lot better hunters than I am, and I want to learn from all of them and the people who are just coming up. And there's a lot of guys right now that are you know are just starting out, have killed two or
Mhm.
three good bucks, and they're catching on with this stuff quick.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it took me years to get to where they're at now.
I know, right? It's yeah, the internet age certainly has expedited. Now, that's an interesting question, right? Because the internet age has certainly expedited people's kind of learning curve, or their academic learning curve, right? But I also kind of think there's a little bit of a false summit, if you will, that they're missing the kind of the time in the woods aspect of it, because they have this false kind of confidence of the amount of knowledge they're able to gain without having to kind of like put the boots on the ground, so to speak.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm with you on that. And then it leads all over into deer scores
Mm-hmm.
and what's the best way to do it. I mean, okay, in Ohio, baiting is like crazy. I mean,
Right.
if you're not putting out some bait, you're missing out because the neighbor's pulling all your deer away.
Right.
And I just, I listen to these people. Yeah, I've killed two or three big bucks in a row, 3 or 4 years, and they're hunting out of a ground blind over bait. And I'm
Right.
like, dude, you're not learning anything.
Yeah.
Or you're setting up in a box blind hunting over a big food plot. You're not learning anything. If that's the way people want to hunt, that's fine. But that is not, learning woodsmanship, getting out there, tracking down deer, moving sets, using wind and thermals and stuff. You can throw all that out the window when they're
Yeah.
hunting over bait and hunting up blind.
Yeah, it's you're not figuring out that whenever the that shadow casts on that side of the ridge, the thermal drops and you can follow it around. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
won't.
Like that's
You won't.
that's the
And
part.
what's really sad is too, you could have a beginning hunter that's only hunted 2 or 3 years. He has the right piece of property. He's going to be successful, and
Yeah,
he may not have any skill in the world and never learn anything other than I need to set this tree, the first week of November, and I'm going to kill a big buck.
right,
And if that's how you want to be, then that's fine. But you're not getting the full experience of hunting,
right.
in my opinion.
So when you think back, speaking of woodsmanship, right? Because I think the one thing, and just going back a little bit to the beginning of our conversation, we were talking about filming. I one of the reasons why I like to film, when I actually follow through with it, is when I do get deer on camera, and it's the same reason why I run all my trail cameras on video modes because I like to watch the deer be deer. And I
Mhm.
forget, who said this to me like years ago, and they just said you want to learn about deer, just put yourself around deer, regardless of whether they're does, bucks, fawns. Just observe deer to understand what deer want to do. And so that's one of the things when I film. It's like I love going back and just watching the footage and watching bucks be bucks. How their
Sure.
mannerisms are and what things are they paying attention to, and they're all different. Is what you start to learn. Like they all have different kind of just like people do. They have all different personalities and stuff like that.
They're exactly like people.
Yeah,
Yes.
and they're your best educator too. You know what I mean? And so
Yep.
when you think back on all the mature deer that you've killed over the years, is there any one that sticks out to you that was the most challenging, that maybe taught you the most?
It's a great question. Um, my gosh, that's a really good question. Got a bunch running through my mind right now. I mean, I've learned off of every one of them. Some of them come a lot easier than others,
Right.
and it's their personalities, especially these bully bucks.
Hmm.
Um, the bully bucks are a lot easier to hunt than the skittish, shy. I don't want to be around anybody type bucks
Mm,
because there's a lot of them out there, and those usually seem like they're less stressed.
right.
Um, I don't know. I mean, watching a deer play the wind and
Hmm.
work through the timber, using the wind was probably the best learning experiences I've had.
Hmm.
I did a bed hunting. I guess I learned a lot from a buck I killed a few years ago in Illinois, and it was one of my later kills. I killed it, I think, in 2019. Um, it was a buck that we knew. Me and Justin Hollingsworth hunted
Mm,
the same farm, and we had pictures of him for like 3 years in a row. But nobody seen him the first year. The second year, nobody seen him during the October November time frame. But then late season, Justin seen him a couple times, and Justin ended up picking up his shed. And I went in there and scouted, in November and tried to figure out what was going on. And I know it was just a crapshoot because it was November, but I learned that you don't always hunt back in the timber in mornings.
mhm,
You get out next to the field edges and stuff and catch them coming back into the timber.
mm,
And I did that one morning and caught this buck going in an area that we knew he frequented. And I went in there and found his bed, and it was like textbook.
mm,
And I went back in there. I hung a stand. It wasn't a hang a stand and hunt it the very next day. I hung a stand because a rainstorm was coming in, and I let it play out. And then the next south wind, I jumped back in there and
mm.
killed the thing at like 10 yards. So
Wow. Yeah,
it just
man.
worked out perfect.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like just I always say to people like my favorite places to hunt, are the places where I get to see the most amount of deer. Um,
Mhm.
and not because, whenever I'm hunting, like when I say places to hunt, I'm talking, about states and stuff like that. It's one of the reasons
Yes.
why I like to travel as much as I do. Um, you know, I've given this example in the past that 2 weeks I spent in Iowa, a couple years ago, I felt like I got a master class on deer because the amount of mature deer I was able to just observe and watch in that 2 weeks,
Mhm.
it would have taken me probably 3 full seasons to observe that many mature deer, maybe longer in Pennsylvania, just because we don't have the same age structure. You know what I mean? We just,
Sure.
and so, that hunt, not only did I fill a tag and it was great and it was an awesome hunt and it was challenging, and I made some mistakes and all that stuff. But what I got to watch, just mature deer do mature deer things day after day after day. I was like, the reason I ended up killing the deer I killed is because I ended up, for the first time, it was one of those kind of light bulb moments where it was that trip where I finally figured out how to play wind and thermals correctly. Like where I didn't have to think about it, where I could look at something and be like, oh, the wind's going to doing this. The thermal's going to do this. This is the direction that the wind current is actually going to go.
Yeah.
And that was how I ended up killing that deer, because he had the wind in his face coming in. And I was sitting along this edge of this draw, and my thermal was just dropping down over the edge of the draw, but the wind direction was blowing right in the deer's face. And that was,
So he thought he had it all planned out.
Man,
Boogeyman was sitting off to the side.
I was dropping my milkweed, and it was skating like anywhere from 5 to 10 yards, like to the right of the trail he was going to walk in on. You know what I mean? Where
and those setups like that are so deadly to where they're getting what they want with the wind, but your wind's just right off to the side of them.
Yeah. And you know what tree I'll be? And it was a perfect tree. It was a triple trunk tree that I was set up in between the 3 trunks. You know what I mean? Like where just like super good cover.
Yes.
Nothing was going to come from behind me or below me, because they're not going to wrap around that draw, like the lip of that draw. I mean, they could, but they won't, because that's not the path of least resistance. Right. So
sure.
It's, but you know what tree I'll be in here, not this fall, but the next one coming when I draw that tag. I certainly will have a couple hunts in that spot.
Gotcha. Well, that's awesome. I know that I was just getting harder and harder to draw, which is fine with me, but, I don't know. It depends on what zone you're going in. I hunted last year in Iowa. I wasn't in zone 6. I went up to zone 8 and had a good hunt, but the weather was just terrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hunted the first week and it got up to 80.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it was just terrible.
I was in Kansas last year during that time frame, and it was hot.
Yeah. It was miserable.
Yeah.
So it is what it is. So,
but man, we've been rolling here for just about a little over an hour or so, and I want to be sensitive to your time. And but before I get you out of here, I have one last question for you. It's the hardest one of the whole session, if you're ready for it.
Gotcha. I'm ready.
All right. So you're making a basketball team with deer hunters, and it's going to be private ground, public ground. It doesn't matter, but you have 3 tags that you have to get filled, and your life depends on it. Who are those 3? Who are you giving those 3 tags to?
Can I?
They can be living. They can be dead. They can be people we know. They can be people we know, people we don't know. Doesn't matter.
Who am I giving them 3 tags to? So one would, of course, be Andre. The other one would be in his prime, Miles Keller. And then the last one would be Bobby Worthington.
Yeah. That guy's a killer, man. I'd love to get him on the show. I've traded messages with him back and forth a couple different times.
Yep.
That guy is just seems like such a good dude too.
I've talked to him several times. You won't find a better person than Bobby Worthington.
Yeah.
That's for sure. I've talked to him several times, met him before. He's just, if there was more people in the world like him, it'd be such a better place to live.
Yeah. That's, you spoke a lot of truth with those couple words right there. But, well, cool, man. Well, before I let you get out of here, I want you to let everyone know where they can find out more about you, what you have going on. And I know you have a film coming out also, or video coming out with the Whitetail Addiction guys too. So let folks know when that's all happening.
So you can follow me on Instagram. That's where I mainly put deer stuff. I don't use Facebook too awful much except for family stuff. And then I work with Justin and Andre with Whitetail Addictions. Staff on the custom gear. I've been friends with Andre for a long time. We have a YouTube channel. It's lonewolfcustomgear.com. We got all the new products, and then our Whitetail Addiction shows will all be shown on there. We got, I think, around 14 episodes coming out, starting sometime at the end of June, beginning of July. And we just are a bunch of hardcore hunters that are mobile hunters, and we just try to do it the right way.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on, buddy, and best of luck to you this fall. And let's stay in touch. I'm going to send you a couple pictures of some deer I'm hoping to run into this year.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I appreciate you having me on. I've been waiting for this to happen, so I do appreciate it, and good luck to you as well.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening, and if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there as well. I'd be super appreciative if you do those couple things for me. Before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Spartan Forge, Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, and Genesee Beer. And until next time, we'll see you all.